Megan Langston stood at her husband's funeral, heartbroken, until she locked eyes with Rachel Donovan, who claimed to be his wife too. Neither woman had ever heard of the other, until that day, when Eric's death revealed a twisted double life no one saw coming. Eric Langston lived the kind of life that looked perfect from the outside. To friends and coworkers, he was dependable, easygoing, and always ready with a friendly smile. His job as a regional sales manager had him on the road often, which seemed to suit him just fine. He was good at building trust quickly and even better at keeping his private life to himself. What no one knew was that Eric had mastered the art of compartmentalization. He wasn't just living one life, he was living two. In Portland, Oregon, Eric was a devoted husband to Megan Langston, a marketing executive he had met at a conference 8 years ago. They had bought a home together, hosted neighborhood cookouts, and attended church every Sunday when Eric wasn't traveling. Megan believed her husband's job required frequent business trips to other states, and she never doubted him. His absences made sense. The timing always added up. He'd call her from hotel rooms, text her goodnight, and even send photos of bland hotel breakfasts or busy airports. Just 200 miles north in Seattle, Washington, Eric was someone else entirely. He was known as Eric Donovan and lived with Rachel Donovan, a former nurse turned small business owner. They had met through an online dating site and gotten married 4 years ago. Rachel had no idea that her husband was living under a different name just a few hours away. She thought he was a freelance IT consultant who occasionally traveled for client meetings. Like Megan, Rachel had never suspected anything strange. Eric played his role flawlessly. On weekends, he rotated between his two homes, citing work emergencies or last-minute trips when he needed to be away from one. His charm, punctuality, and ability to anticipate problems before they arose made his deception seamless. He even maintained 2 separate wardrobes, 2 sets of electronics, and 2 phone numbers. His digital life was partitioned just as cleanly as his physical one. He never posted on social media, always paid in cash for sensitive purchases, and left no trail that would link the two versions of himself together. He was careful, methodical, and always thinking ahead. His lies weren't wild. They were carefully measured, believable, and backed by details. When Megan asked for photos from a conference, he had them ready. When Rachel wondered about a strange charge on their joint credit card, he had a plausible explanation within seconds. Over the years, Eric had grown so confident in his deception that he even started taking small risks. He reused the same cologne, wore the same watch in both lives, and visited the same chain restaurants in both cities. But none of these overlapping details ever raised suspicion. Each woman was fully invested in her relationship with him and trusted him completely. Despite the pressure of maintaining 2 marriages, Eric seemed to thrive under the challenge. He enjoyed the control, the secrecy, the sense of being smarter than everyone else. He had built 2 families, each one believing they were his only true home. He bought Rachel a puppy one year, then surprised Megan with a kitchen remodel the next. He planned anniversary trips for both, always justifying why he couldn't travel on the exact date. Everything about his life was a balancing act, and for nearly a decade, he never slipped. He had created an illusion so convincing that even he began to believe in parts of it. Eric's secret world was stable, orderly, and, to him, manageable. But nothing built on lies lasts forever. All it took was one rainy night and a stretch of highway between Portland and Seattle to bring it all crashing down. Eric Langston's carefully constructed world came to a sudden and violent end on a rainy Friday night. The road was slick, visibility was low, and according to witnesses, the car had been speeding just moments before it veered off the highway and slammed into a guardrail. The impact killed him instantly. Within hours, Emergency responders arrived at the scene and began the routine process of identifying the victim. Inside his wallet was a driver's license with the name Eric Donovan and an emergency contact, listed as Rachel Donovan. She was called early the next morning and informed of the accident. Shocked and heartbroken, Rachel began making arrangements for a small memorial in Seattle. She believed her husband had been returning from a client meeting in Oregon when tragedy struck. Meanwhile, in Portland, Megan Langston was pacing her living room. Eric hadn't come home as expected, and his phone had gone straight to voicemail since the previous night. At first, she assumed he had gotten caught up in a last-minute meeting or fallen asleep in a hotel. But as hours passed with no word, concern gave way to panic. She called his office and was told he hadn't checked in. Confused and worried, she filed a missing person report. The police ran Eric Langston's information through their system, and a red flag appeared almost immediately. A body matching his description had been recovered in Washington, but under a different name, Eric Donovan. Investigators contacted the Washington State Police to confirm the identity. Fingerprints confirmed the truth. Eric Langston and Eric Donovan were the same person. Two wives, two lives, one man. The officers were faced with a situation that was strange even by their standards. They informed Megan that her husband had been found, but also that there was another woman who claimed to be his wife. Megan was too stunned to respond. It felt like fiction, like some kind of cruel mistake. Still reeling from the news, she decided to attend the funeral that had already been arranged in Seattle. She needed answers, and she needed to see for herself. When Megan arrived at the small memorial, dressed in black and holding an obituary that listed her husband under a name she had never heard, the tension in the room thickened instantly. Rachel, standing near the casket, stared at the unfamiliar woman now approaching her with a look of confusion and fury. Whispers filled the chapel as both women realized they were looking at someone who claimed the same man, the same love, the same life. At first, neither of them knew what to say. Shock held them both in place as mourners looked on in uncomfortable silence. Within minutes, everything unraveled. Rachel pulled up her marriage certificate. Megan had brought theirs too. The dates overlapped. The names, though slightly different, were tied to the same man. There were no excuses left, no explanations that could smooth over the depth of the betrayal. As news of the bizarre double life spread, so did the media attention. Reporters camped outside the funeral home. Photos of Eric appeared on television screens across the country under headlines like "Man Lives Double Life" and "Two Wives, One Funeral." But for Megan and Rachel, it wasn't just a story. It was the beginning of a nightmare. Grief turned to rage. Mourning turned into suspicion. They had both been deceived for years by the man they loved, and now they were left with the question neither of them could answer. Who had they really married? Eric was dead, but his secrets were just beginning to surface. In the weeks following Eric's funeral, Megan and Rachel found themselves at the center of an emotional storm. The betrayal ran deeper than either had imagined. They had both believed they were grieving widows, only to discover they had been part of a carefully planned lie. The media frenzy eventually died down, but the questions remained. Neither woman could walk away without understanding how this had happened and what else Eric had hidden from them. Alone in their respective homes, they began sorting through the pieces of his life, hoping to find clarity. Rachel started with their shared documents, bank statements, credit card records, and digital files. At first, everything appeared ordinary. But then she noticed a series of withdrawals from an account she didn't recognize, all made in towns she had never visited. The amounts were consistent and occurred every other month. She also found receipts from a jewelry store in Idaho and a hotel in Montana, neither of which matched anything she had experienced with him. Curious and suspicious, she dug deeper and uncovered a storage unit rented under the name Eric D. Langford. It was the first clue that he had used even more aliases. Megan, too, was uncovering her own share of troubling discoveries. Eric had kept a locked briefcase in their attic, one she had never thought to question before. She found the key taped inside the cover of an old dictionary. When she opened the case, it was filled with neatly organized envelopes, burner phones, and a second laptop. On the laptop, there were email exchanges with women she had never heard of, each saved under different folder names. Some messages were flirtatious, others were financial in nature. There were instructions, reminders, and even documents prepared for what appeared to be identity changes. One document detailed a plan to leave the country under a new name, Logan Emery. The departure date was circled for the following month. Realizing the magnitude of what they were dealing with, both women separately turned over their discoveries to law enforcement. Detectives reopened the case, not as a domestic deception, but as a potential financial crime. What started as a personal betrayal now had legal consequences. Investigators began combing through Eric's digital and financial footprints, looking for a pattern. What they found was a web of bank accounts spread across 3 states, each tied to different variations of his name. They also uncovered the existence of a third woman, Alicia Morgan, who had received monthly wire transfers from an account belonging to E. Donovan. When police interviewed Alicia, she revealed that she had dated Eric on and off for 5 years and had believed he was a widowed single father. She had no idea about either wife or the elaborate life he had built around them. Alicia provided emails and a notebook Eric had left behind in her apartment months earlier. The contents of the notebook were especially disturbing. It included coded entries, passwords, and a checklist of people he had looped in or kept separate. The truth became more chilling with each new detail. Eric hadn't just lived 2 lives. He had been managing a complex network of relationships, false identities, and secret finances. Megan and Rachel, once strangers drawn together by tragedy, were now unwilling partners in untangling a man's hidden empire. His death had exposed the surface of the deception, but beneath it lay years of calculated manipulation and fraud. The man they had loved and trusted wasn't just living a lie. He had been building it brick by brick, never planning to stop, only to disappear. Investigators followed the trail of forged identities, cross-state accounts, and digital breadcrumbs until they reached Alicia Morgan's apartment in Boise, Idaho. Alicia was quiet at first, clearly shaken when officers told her about Eric's death and his secret marriages. She admitted to dating Eric for several years and knew him only as Eric Dalton, a kind, widowed father who worked in cybersecurity and traveled often. He had introduced her to a few of his clients over video calls, but police later confirmed those meetings were faked, with Eric using fake profiles and AI-generated voices. Alicia had begun to question Eric's stories about a year before his death, especially after discovering inconsistencies in his travel logs and catching him in small lies. She ended the relationship, but Eric kept in touch and had even sent her money as recently as 2 months before the crash. The most revealing item Alicia gave to the police was a small spiral notebook Eric had left behind in her home. The pages were full of handwritten notes, most in shorthand or abbreviations. Investigators deciphered it slowly. Inside were fragments of a complex schedule that detailed which identity he was using on certain days, whom he was seeing, what stories he had told each woman, and a list titled Exit Plan. Under that heading were a series of cryptic tasks: close Idaho P.O. Box, transfer Cayman funds, destroy Langston phone, renew Logan passport. It appeared Eric had been preparing to vanish, likely planning to sever all ties and assume a final identity, Logan Emery. What disturbed detectives most were 2 entries marked with stars. Megan, keep calm, and Rachel, delay till after trip. It wasn't clear what he intended to delay, but the tone suggested control and manipulation. Eric had begun to see people not as loved ones, but as obstacles to be managed. The calm, charismatic man everyone thought they knew had turned out to be calculating, even cold. He wasn't just living a double life. He was orchestrating a slow escape. As the investigation expanded, authorities uncovered a series of encrypted emails on Eric's laptop that hinted at offshore accounts. Several of the email addresses traced back to a digital privacy service in Panama. Though the accounts were protected by heavy encryption, forensic analysts managed to crack one password using a variation of Rachel's birthday. Inside, they found bank records showing wire transfers totaling over $300,000 sent to international accounts over the past 5 years. No tax records accounted for this money, and none of it had been reported under any of Eric's identities. Investigators now suspected that Eric had been involved in financial fraud or possibly even identity theft. They believed he may have stolen from his employers, or more likely, from people he met through his various identities. Some of the women in his emails had sent him large sums of money, usually under the belief they were helping him with business investments or family emergencies. None of them had filed complaints, likely out of embarrassment or continued belief in his lies. The deeper police went, the more tangled the story became. Megan and Rachel were left in limbo, forced to watch the man they had trusted be dismantled. Piece by piece, neither could reconcile the person they had known with the criminal mastermind emerging from the investigation. The worst part wasn't just that he lied. It was that he had nearly gotten away with everything. His death had halted the plan, but not before years of emotional damage had been done. Eric had lived among them like a ghost, leaving behind shattered trust, stolen identities, and a legacy of unanswered questions. 6 months after Eric's funeral, Megan received a call from a private investigator she had hired in the early days of her grief. Though the case had become quiet, she wanted closure, something to help her understand how the man she married could have kept so much hidden. What the investigator found wasn't just another lie. It was something that changed the entire story. In Sacramento, California, a woman named Lisa Jordan had come forward. She had seen Eric's face in an online article about his dual marriages and contacted the investigator directly. Her story was simple but devastating. Lisa had been in a relationship with Eric for nearly 9 years. She knew him as Eric Langford and believed he was a widowed single father working in technology sales. Together, they had a son, now 8 years old. Eric had been sending Lisa money every month since the child was born. He visited when he could, always apologizing for his demanding travel schedule and claiming he couldn't fully commit due to emotional scars from his late wife. Lisa had no reason to question his story. He never disappeared completely. He was always consistent, even if distant. She had no idea that he was simultaneously married to 2 other women. She had no idea he had died until she read his name and saw his face in a viral news article. Megan and Rachel were stunned when they heard. Neither had any clue that Eric had a child. The news opened a new wave of grief, confusion, and legal complications. Lisa agreed to a paternity test, which confirmed Eric was the biological father. She provided school records, photos, and copies of emails he had sent over the years. In one message, Eric even hinted at one day taking their son somewhere peaceful and far away where no one knows our name. It appeared that Lisa, too, was part of his exit plan, whether willingly or not. The existence of the child shifted everything. Now there was a real question about who would inherit what little was left of Eric's estate. Megan and Rachel had both been listed as sole beneficiaries on separate life insurance policies. But with a confirmed child in the picture, those policies were now subject to probate. The court began the process of untangling the legal mess Eric had left behind. Dozens of fake names, hidden assets, and overlapping claims made it nearly impossible to resolve quickly. Financially, Eric had left little behind that could be traced or claimed. Most of his accounts had been emptied months before his death, and the remaining assets were locked behind legal walls. But emotionally, the damage was far greater. Megan, Rachel, and Lisa all found themselves bound together by a man they no longer recognized. Their lives, once private and separate, were now intertwined by betrayal, grief, and shame. Public interest in the case faded, but the consequences did not. They each had to explain the truth to family, friends, and, in Lisa's case, to a child who would one day want to know who his father really was. In the end, Eric Langston became a symbol of something larger, a warning about how much a person can hide behind a smile, a suit, and a schedule. He didn't leave behind a love story or a legacy. He left behind broken promises, financial wreckage, and unanswered questions. For the women who loved him, there was no justice, no final moment of understanding, just silence. Eric had built a life of deception so carefully that it only ended when he did. And even in death, the full truth remained just out of reach.